The mindless scroll through the digital stream of fleeting moments. A Saturday afternoon, ritual born of habit and a quiet kitchen, was abruptly fractured. There, amidst the ephemeral dance of curated lives, their faces blazed onto my screen. A tableau so achingly intimate, it felt like a physical blow. My husband, Charles, sharing an ice cream. No, sharing a moment of exquisite, stolen bliss on a sun-drenched street with Vivian Harper, his college sweetheart, and the crisp white shirt he wore, the one that framed his tender smile as he leaned into her offering. Its pristine surface was the product of my own hand, meticulously ironed only last night, the faint scent of lavender spray still clinging to its fibers in my memory. In that searing instant, 40 years of carefully constructed composure, of swallowed words and papered over cracks, didn't just crumble. They detonated. It was over. People perpetually misjudge the quiet resilience of a housewife, but once that quiet is shattered, once she awakens to the full scope of her own strength, they possess no true conception of the chilled, focused ruthlessness she can unleash. It was the pale light of early Saturday, when Dr. Charles Bennett, my husband, departed for what he termed a faculty meeting. Eastridge College, his academic sanctuary, always seemed to claim him. As one of its most venerated senior professors, Charles orbited the world of academia relentlessly, even on weekends. His early departures and late returns had become the silent rhythm of our shared existence, as had my solitary stewardship of our meticulously kept home. That particular morning, the floors had gleamed under 3 vigorous moppings. The laundry spun and folded with practiced efficiency, and Charles' shirts and slacks were pressed to his exacting standards, crisp, flawless, utterly devoid of creases. For 4 decades this ritual had been mine, a task that had long ago shed its mundane skin to become an intrinsic unspoken clause in the marriage contract itself. The clock hands had already swept past noon by the time I finally looked up from my domestic endeavors. I hastily assembled a simple sandwich, my mind already wrestling with the complex culinary equation of our evening meal. Today marked our 40th wedding anniversary, an occasion to be commemorated with a family dinner. Our son Ryan and his wife Natalie were bringing our grandson Liam. The dietary restrictions alone were a minefield. Charles had an unyielding aversion to the mere aroma of pork. Ryan staunchly refused all vegetables. Natalie was currently navigating another health kick, demanding low-fat, low-carb, and inevitably flavor-challenged options, and young Liam suffered from a severe seafood allergy. Orchestrating these family meals invariably induced a throbbing headache. I nibbled at my lunch, fingers idly flicking through Instagram reels, a passive search for recipe inspiration. That's when a locally filmed video snagged my attention. A gray-haired couple, elegant even in their casualness, stood on a bustling sidewalk. The woman, laughing with a youthful effervescence that belied her years, held an ice cream cone, taking a delicate lick before gently, playfully, raising it to the man's lips. He smiled, a look of profound tenderness softening his features, his hand cupping hers as he leaned in, taking a bite from the exact same spot on the creamy swirl. The gesture was so unreservedly intimate, so achingly sweet, it was almost painful to witness. Their hair had surrendered to silver, their faces bore the fine cartography of age, yet the warmth emanating between them was a palpable entity, something one felt could be reached through the screen and touched. The unseen camera person, clearly a passerby captivated by the scene, couldn't help but murmur, "God, I hope I find someone to grow old with like that." Had I not recognized them, perhaps I too would have sighed, moved by this fleeting glimpse of enduring love. But recognition slammed into me with the force of a physical impact. The man, my husband, was adorned in that immaculate white shirt and charcoal gray slacks, the precise ensemble I had painstakingly prepared the previous evening. A faint red welt still throbbed on my wrist, a souvenir from an errant burst of steam from the iron. The polished black leather shoes encasing his feet, I had buffed them to a mirror shine with a soft cloth and expensive polish just that morning. That man, so tenderly accepting a shared confection, was Charles Bennett. And the woman, the graceful figure feeding him ice cream with such familiar ease, was Vivian Harper, the incandescent flame of his college years. Time had etched delicate lines around Vivian's eyes, yet her beauty remained undiminished, a classic, resilient elegance. She wore a form-fitting vintage dress that accentuated her slender figure, her poise effortless, her inherent sophistication seemingly untouched by the passage of years. The video looped, an endless replay of their stolen intimacy. I lost all track of minutes stretching into an hour, my vision blurring, the screen warping before me. I hadn't even registered the silent cascade of tears until they splashed onto the worn fabric of my apron, smearing an old grease stain just above the soft, permanent curve of my belly. And then, from the depths of that stunned grief, a thought, sharp and cold, surfaced. Charles, with his rigid particularities, his obsessive-compulsive tendencies. He ate exclusively from his designated blue ceramic bowls, employing only dark wooden chopsticks. His drinking water was confined to a specific clear glass. I, in stark contrast, used white porcelain dishes, light metal utensils, and a favorite ceramic mug. The thought of our culinary implements ever intermingling was anathema to him. When it was just the two of us sharing a meal, he would physically employ a spatula to delineate an imaginary boundary across any shared serving dish. His portion, meticulously served, was sacrosanct. The remainder was mine. I recalled with a fresh wave of nausea an incident years ago when I had inadvertently reached across that invisible line. He'd slammed his cutlery onto the table with such violence that soup had exploded upwards, scalding my face. We lived then in a cramped, aging apartment, the kind where the stove malfunctioned with infuriating regularity. Still, I had cleaned up the mess, his mess, my face, and restarted the meal preparation. Only after I had patiently coaxed him into finishing his portion did I become aware of the sharp, twisting pain coiling through my own abdomen. It was mere weeks after I had given birth to Ryan, and in that solitary moment of dawning agony, my heart had clenched as if caught in an unyielding vice. My mouth opened, a silent scream, but no air came. All those memories, the ones I had so desperately, so meticulously, tried to bury beneath layers of routine and resignation, now came crashing back with the overwhelming force of a tidal wave. From the moment my pregnancy with Ryan became apparent, from the day I brought our son home, Charles and I had not shared a marital bed. 38 years of sleeping in separate rooms, separate lives lived under one roof. Kisses were virtually non-existent. On the rare, almost clinically scheduled occasions we engaged in physical intimacy, he was cold, mechanical, utterly devoid of tenderness or connection. It sounds pathetic, I know, writing it down now. For decades, I had convinced myself that this was simply the essence of Charles Bennett, distant, inherently indifferent, emotionally barricaded. I genuinely believed it wouldn't have mattered whom he married. His nature was immutable. But today, confronted with the undeniable evidence of his capacity for warmth, for shared joy, for intimacy with Vivian, I realized the devastating truth. I was profoundly, tragically wrong. Charles could laugh with abandon. He could hold a woman's hand with gentle possessiveness. He could take a bite from an ice cream cone already tasted by another. His suffocating obsession with cleanliness, his rigid boundaries, his emotional sterility, those were reserved exclusively for me. I don't know if the ensuing hours were lost to sleep born of exhaustion, or if I simply succumbed to a merciful blackout brought on by sheer, unadulterated heartbreak. When I finally regained awareness, sprawled uncomfortably on the living room couch, the afternoon light slanted weakly through the windows. It was already 4 o'clock. Muffled voices, low and measured, seeped from Charles' study, those distinct academic tones I knew so well. I pushed myself upright, my limbs stiff and unresponsive. I navigated to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my swollen face, the reflection staring back at me a stranger. Then, moving with a newfound, almost trance-like deliberation, I went to the bedroom and changed into the nicest, most expensive outfit I owned, a silk dress I'd bought years ago for an anniversary he'd forgotten. After that, I turned and walked purposefully towards his study. He was engrossed in a video call, naturally, with one of his graduate students, dissecting some dense, impenetrable academic theory. The moment he heard the study door creak open, his head swiveled, and in the split second, his face moved out of the camera's frame. He shot me a look of pure venom, accompanied by a subtle, dismissive flick of his wrist, in order to depart. I feigned obliviousness, standing perfectly still, a silent sentinel in the doorway. Left with no alternative that wouldn't expose his domestic tyranny, he seamlessly resumed his performance, the mask of the gentle, devoted professor, sliding effortlessly back into place, patiently guiding his acolyte through whatever convoluted intellectual maze they had wandered into. I just stood there, my gaze fixed, studying this man I had cohabited with for 4 decades. His gray hair, thinning now, was slicked back with gel, an attempt at youthful precision. Thin, gold-rimmed spectacles rested on the prominent bridge of his nose. Age, ironically, had softened the once harsh angles of his face, lending him an undeserved veneer of scholarly refinement, of quiet dignity. But who, I wondered with a surge of icy contempt, would ever believe that this paragon of kindness and respectability hadn't even bothered to check on his wife, whom he must have seen collapsed, insensate, on the living room couch? Charles finally concluded the call, closing his laptop with a decisive snap. His brows, moments before arranged in an expression of thoughtful pedagogy, now drew together in a deep, irritable scowl. "What are you just standing there for, Elaine? Ryan is coming for dinner. Do you have any concept of the time? You haven't even begun to prepare the meal." "I need to speak with you, Charles," I stated, my voice surprisingly steady as I stepped forward, moving closer to his imposing mahogany desk. Perhaps I had been standing immobile for too long, because my legs suddenly felt unsteady, a weakness spreading through them. I instinctively reached out, my hand landing on a teetering stack of academic papers to steady myself. Charles clearly hadn't anticipated this frontal assault. His lips quivered, a telltale sign of his composure cracking. His posture, usually so rigidly upright, seemed to falter. I don't wish to argue, Elaine. There's absolutely no point in dredging up all that ancient history. Just go and prepare dinner." But I was no longer prepared to let it go. Not this time. Not ever again. I retrieved my phone from my pocket, turned the volume to its maximum setting, and held the small screen directly in front of his face. The video of him and Vivian, playing on a loop, their shared laughter a mocking soundtrack to the demise of our marriage. His expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable, annoyance, fear, in his eyes. "Elaine, what is this supposed to signify? I merely ran into Vivian by chance today. What was I expected to do? Be rude? People are always so quick to make unwarranted assumptions." A cold, brittle laugh escaped my lips. "A spontaneous ice cream coincidence, you mean? But Charles, you don't even like sweets. You find them cloying, unsophisticated." His eyes darkened, a dangerous glint appearing within them. His voice began to rise, escalating in volume, until it seemed to physically shake the very walls of his sacrosanct study. "You have always been this petty, Elaine, just as you were 40 years ago. You never evolve, never change. I swear to God, absolutely nothing transpired between Vivian and myself. Don't you dare taint our pure, long-standing friendship with your twisted, unfounded suspicions. Clear turning point? Just..." A profound, bone-deep exhaustion suddenly washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my rage, leaving only a desolate, hollow ache. Was this truly the man I had once loved with such fierce devotion, the man I had stood by, defended, and sacrificed for 4 long decades? Without another word, I turned and walked numbly into the kitchen. I retrieved Charles' designated blue ceramic bowl and his special clear drinking glass. Returning to the study, I held them up. "You've spent our entire marriage, Charles, meticulously segregating everything in this household, right down to the very dishes from which we consume our meals. Yet, with Vivian Harper, you exhibited no such fastidious reservations about sharing a damned ice cream cone, her saliva mingling with yours. With a sudden, convulsive movement, I raised the bowl and the glass high above my head, and then, with all the pent-up frustration of 40 years, I smashed them violently against the polished hardwood floor. Porcelain and glass shards exploded outwards, scattering like shrapnel across the room. Charles leaped back, a choked sound of alarm escaping him. A tiny fragment of glass, sharp as a razor, grazed my cheek. I felt the immediate sting, saw a single drop of blood well up, crimson against my skin. I wiped it away with the back of my hand, my voice emerging quiet, almost serene, yet underscored with an unbreakable resolve. For 40 years, you have steadfastly refused to eat from my bowl, to drink from my cup, regardless of how scrupulously I cleaned them. So now, Charles, I have broken yours. Tonight, for our anniversary dinner, would you be willing, just once, to eat from my plate, to drink from my glass? And if you dare to utter another lie, another facile excuse, then may you and your precious Vivian Harper rot in hell together. Charles froze, his face a mask of disbelief and something akin to fear. He stared at me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time in decades, for a long, protracted moment, before finally responding, his voice effaced by an eerie, unnatural calm. Don't be utterly ridiculous, Elaine. It's still relatively early. I shall simply go out and purchase a new set. A small, humorless laugh escaped me. A distinguished university professor, a man of supposed intellect and reason, too terrified of a desperate woman's curse to offer even a single comforting falsehood to his wife of 40 years. Charles despised me, that much was clear, but years ago he had married me out of sheer pragmatic necessity. He couldn't afford college on his own meager resources. I, on the other hand, had been blindly, foolishly, head over heels in love with him. I knew, with a painful certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I wasn't pretty enough for him, not sophisticated enough. I clung to my academic achievements, my superior grades, as a desperate validation of my worth. I had consistently achieved better test scores than he ever had, yet I had willingly, eagerly, sacrificed it all. I abandoned my education, worked those 3 soul-crushing jobs, all so that he could complete his degree, could achieve his ambitions. For decades, I had given him everything I possessed, my youth, my dreams, my unwavering loyalty. And in return he had gifted me with distance, with cold indifference, with thinly veiled revulsion. And now, this same man could tenderly hold Vivian Harper's hand, could share an ice cream cone with her, without a moment's hesitation, without the slightest flinch of his meticulously cultivated disgust. The fire in my heart, the one that had burned so steadfastly, so hopefully, for so many barren years, finally, irrevocably, went out. "We're done, Charles," I stated, the words devoid of heat, only a chilling finality. I turned and walked towards the bedroom, beginning to pack my belongings in a numb, mechanical silence, his bitter, dismissive words echoing venomously in my ears. "You're 60 years old, Elaine, and suddenly you fancy yourself some liberated modern woman, attempting to stage a dramatic breakup? Please, who do you imagine is going to feed you, to clothe you? You're a housewife. I could hire a professional cleaner tomorrow who would undoubtedly do a far superior job. You honestly believe you possess any intrinsic worth? You're old. What man?" Every individual needs an outlet for their emotions, a place to discharge their frustrations. Charles was always the epitome of the perfect gentleman in public, his charm and erudition on full display. But the moment he crossed the threshold of our home, that carefully constructed facade would crumble, revealing the sharp, cold, cutting man beneath. To him, I was perpetually clumsy, slow-witted, plain-looking, and utterly unimpressive in every conceivable aspect. But at the very least, I worked diligently. I was healthy. I wouldn't starve on the street. And more crucially, I possessed one irreplaceable lifeline in my otherwise constricted world. My wildly irreverent, fiercely loyal, and endlessly supportive best friend, Samantha Quinn. Meeting her, years ago, at a drab community bake sale, was, without a shadow of a doubt, the single greatest stroke of unadulterated luck in my entire existence. Just then, as if summoned by my thoughts, my phone buzzed, with an incoming voice message. I hit play. Samantha's voice, vibrant, unapologetic, and full of life, burst through the speaker. "Elaine, darling, just pulled out of my garage. I'll be at your place in precisely 20 minutes. Want me to bring a couple of strapping muscleheads to thoroughly beat the ever-loving crap out of that geriatric bastard?" An involuntary laugh, the first genuine one in what felt like an eternity, escaped me. "I'll wait for you downstairs, Sam. Thanks for taking me in, darling." I finished packing with surprising speed, a lifetime of belongings condensed into a single worn suitcase. I zipped it shut and dragged its considerable weight toward the front door. But just as my hand reached for the doorknob, it swung abruptly open from the outside. There stood Ryan, my son. Behind him, looking distressed, were Natalie and little Liam. Ryan's eyes, cold and hard, immediately fell on the suitcase. He snatched it from my grasp, his tone instantly laced with a familiar, inherited irritation. "Mom, seriously? You're far too old for this kind of melodrama. Dad just got home from work, he's utterly exhausted, and now you're intent on creating a scene? Can't you demonstrate even a shred of compassion?" This son, the one I had raised with my own two hands, the child who had grown up witnessing Charles dismiss me daily with cold words and even sharper, more wounding silences, had clearly, seamlessly absorbed the same destructive habits. To Ryan, his father was the respected professor, the unassailable head of the household, the man who kept their world turning smoothly. And I was just a faded, inconsequential housewife, a background figure in the grand drama of their lives. He had long, conveniently, forgotten how his esteemed father used to bury himself in esoteric research and relentless tenure tracks, while Ryan, as a small child, was perpetually sickly, in and out of hospitals. It was I, only I, who had carried him to countless appointments, who had stayed vigilantly by his side through every burning fever and terrifying, sleepless night, who had single-handedly held our crumbling home together with sheer willpower and bare hands. His words, each one a carefully aimed projectile, pierced me like jagged shards of glass, buzzing in my ears, each syllable louder and more cruel than the last. I glanced down at my stomach, the focus of his filial disgust. The truth was, my limbs remained slender, my face had retained its shape, a classic oval, soft and proportionate. It was only my abdomen that protruded so starkly, a persistent bulge I could never quite conceal. It had begun during my pregnancy with Ryan. He had been positioned anteriorly in the womb, a condition doctors termed a pendulous belly. The stretch marks were deep, a permanent roadmap of that time, and my abdominal muscles had torn apart so severely that a 4-finger-wide separation remained, a diastasis recti, that never fully healed. Charles was then finishing his final demanding semester of college, juggling internships, crucial job interviews, and an endless stream of social engagements with classmates from across the country. I barely had a few days of postpartum rest before I was thrust back into the relentless chaos of newborn care, simultaneously managing his aging, dependent parents and running the entire household single-handedly. As Charles ascended the career ladder and his income consequently improved, he began to view my part-time jobs, the ones that had kept us afloat during his studies, as a stain on his burgeoning professional image. A working wife, in his newly refined eyes, was beneath his station. That's when I finally capitulated, relinquishing everything, and became a full-time, unpaid housewife. Back then, no one even spoke of postpartum recovery or rehabilitation. I was afforded barely any time to heal properly. Due to the lack of adequate rest and proper care, I ended up with a mild uterine prolapse. It wasn't until years later, when social media exploded into ubiquity, that I discovered online yoga tutorials and began diligently following pelvic floor recovery workouts on my own, slowly, painstakingly, attempting to piece my own body back together. I've known, with a quiet, internal certainty for a long time, that my sacrifices held no tangible value in their eyes. But I kept numbing myself, pretending it didn't matter. Now, however, I was done arguing. I yanked the suitcase forcefully from Ryan's grasp and walked out the front door without a single backward glance. Little Liam burst into frightened tears behind me, his small cries tearing at my heart, a direct consequence of the sudden, violent eruption of adult tension. My heart clenched painfully, but I forced myself not to turn around, not to falter. Then, Ryan's voice, sharp and cold as a winter wind, rang out like a physical slap. Even without Vivian Harper, Mom, my dad would still be in high demand. If you walk out that door right now, don't even think about ever coming back. My eyes stung, blurring my vision. How had that sweet little boy, the one who used to call me Mommy 100 times a day in his soft, cherubic baby voice, metamorphosed into this callous stranger? How had the child I had nurtured with every ounce of my love become the one now twisting the knife in my heart? I dragged my heavy suitcase down the porch stairs, each step an effort. As I reached the curb, a cherry-red Porsche, gleaming and ostentatious, rolled smoothly to a stop beside me. The tinted window slid down silently, revealing Samantha Dowd. Her oversized designer sunglasses caught the flickering porch light, and her artfully styled silver-gray hair glowed like polished metal in the encroaching dusk. At our age, dyeing one's hair often felt like a pointless battle against time, but every strand of silver on Samantha's head was a defiant badge of honor, a testament to who she was. Bold, untamed, and gloriously, unapologetically herself. She lifted a hand, adorned with chunky gold rings, and gave me a dramatic, theatrical wave. "When girlfriends reunite, darling," she proclaimed, her voice rich with amusement, "there's no such thing as insurmountable problems. Gas tank's full. Just say the word. Where are we headed to conquer next?" I couldn't suppress a watery smile. Thank God for Samantha. As long as I had her by my side, maybe, just maybe, my life wasn't entirely hopeless after all. "Nowhere particularly special, Sam," I said softly, a measure of the day's tension beginning to ease from my shoulders. "Let's just go to your place first." Her apartment was a spacious, light-filled sanctuary in a high-rise building downtown, nearly 2,000 square feet of open-plan living space that was entirely, unequivocally, her own, independent, peaceful, and unapologetically Samantha. She had never married, never once expressed envy for anyone else's so-called domestic bliss. Samantha lived boldly, freely, radiating more authentic vitality than most people ever dared to dream of. I used to naively tell her, in my pre-awakening days, that a woman always needed a man to lean on. She would simply laugh, a rich, throaty sound, and shake her head with an air of pitying amusement. Looking back now, the irony was almost laughable. The joke, it turned out, had been on me all along. Samantha, in her typical extravagant fashion, ordered a massive takeout spread, gourmet burgers, truffle fries, crispy fried chicken, and even 2 large cups of decadent chocolate ice cream. My grandson Liam's all-time favorites? My gaze fixated on the ice cream, my thoughts immediately, unwillingly, drifting back to that damnable video. Charles and Vivian, sharing that cone, their faces alight with the easy intimacy of new lovers, or perhaps rekindled old ones. Samantha, perceptive as ever, shoved one of the rapidly melting cups into my hands, the sudden chill of it snapping me back to the present. "This is your absolute favorite flavor, Elaine. Eat it before it turns into chocolate soup." I scooped a huge, defiant bite into my mouth. The intense coldness made my brain throb, a momentary sharp ache, but strangely, for the first time in days, my heart didn't seem to hurt quite so much. After dinner, we cleared away the remnants of our feast, then collapsed onto her oversized, impossibly comfortable beanbag couch in the living room. We turned on a mindless movie, began talking, sharing stories and silences, and somewhere between bursts of laughter and quiet commiseration, we both drifted off to sleep. By the time I opened my eyes again, the city lights beyond her vast windows indicated it was deep into the night. I sat up on the couch, momentarily disoriented. There were no chores clamoring for my attention, no complex breakfast menu to plan, no endless errands to run. The night stretched out before me, a vast expanse of blank, unfamiliar time. I realized with a jolt that I didn't even know what to do with myself, with this newfound, unscheduled freedom. Samantha stirred awake shortly thereafter. She glanced at the glowing digits of the clock on the wall and smirked. Well, well, looks like someone's not falling back into dreamland anytime soon. She grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me towards her bedroom, stopping dramatically in front of her enormous walk-in closet, a veritable Aladdin's cave of vibrant silks and designer labels. Pick something fabulous to wear, she commanded, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. That tired old outfit you've been sporting, consign it to the trash heap, darling. It's seriously bringing down the entire vibe. I blinked, still groggy. At this hour, Sam, where on earth are we possibly going? She merely raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into an even more mischievous smile. Out of course, Elaine. What else is the glorious night good for? I hesitated, a lifetime of ingrained caution rising up. Come on, Sam. We're two women of a certain age, venturing out this late. What if something happens, like a robbery, or worse? But Samantha had already tossed a sumptuous deep purple velvet jumpsuit into my arms. Stop your whining and put this on. I just bought it. It's absolutely perfect for you. Then, she grabbed her car keys from the dresser and breezed towards the front door. I'll be waiting in the car, darling. Don't dally. I let out a helpless laugh and shook my head. What choice did I have? She was already halfway out the apartment. I couldn't exactly let her navigate the nocturnal city alone. What I hadn't anticipated, not in my wildest imaginings, was our destination. A pulsating, thumping nightclub. The moment we pulled up to the curb, my stomach plummeted. I followed Samantha out of the car, clinging tightly to the corner of her expensive leather jacket, like a lost, bewildered child. I had never, in my 60 years of existence, stepped foot inside a place remotely like this. The instant we walked through the velvet-roped entrance, a dapper young man, clearly the bar manager, hurried over, beaming from ear to ear. Miss Quinn, haven't seen you in days. The usual, I presume? VIP suite upstairs. Samantha, without missing a beat, tossed him her car keys. Of course, darling. Park it, get it washed, and send up a few delightful charmers while you're at it. I trailed in her wake, past the vibrating bass of the main bar area, up a plushly carpeted staircase lined with staff members who all greeted her with the deference typically reserved for royalty. My heart was pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. My blood pressure must have been skyrocketing. Sam, what on earth are we even doing here? I whispered urgently, my voice barely audible above the din. I can't sing, I can't dance, and I most definitely do not drink anything stronger than a wheat tea. Samantha clapped me robustly on the shoulder, her laughter loud, carefree, and utterly infectious. Sweetheart, she declared, her eyes twinkling, when you are in my esteemed company, someone else will do the singing, someone else will perform the dancing, and someone else will ensure the damn cocktails are expertly mixed and delivered. All you are required to do, she winked conspiratorially, is have an outrageously good time. We were still catching our breath when the door to our opulent private suite swung open. The manager returned, leading a veritable troop of young men, tall, stylishly dressed, mostly in their 20s or early 30s. Each one looked as if he had just stepped off the pages of a high-fashion magazine. Miss Quinn, the manager grinned, gesturing expansively, allow me to present the finest selection in the establishment. You and your charming friend, please, take your pick. Samantha waved him off with an imperious flick of her wrist. Thank you, darling. You may go now. As soon as the door clicked shut, it was as if an invisible signal had been given. The young men moved in smoothly, half gravitating towards Samantha, half towards me. One, with a disarmingly boyish smile, positioned himself behind me and gently, expertly, began massaging my tense shoulders. Another settled beside me on the velvet banquette, offering a silver tray laden with artistically sliced exotic fruit. A third approached with a flute of bubbling champagne, leaning in slightly, his voice a polite murmur as he inquired if I'd care for a drink. And the last one, undoubtedly the boldest of the bunch, lifted his t-shirt just enough to reveal a glimpse of a perfectly sculpted chest, flashing a deliberately mischievous grin. Hey, gorgeous, he purred. Want to feel how fast my heart's racing for you? Oh, dear God. This world had clearly gone completely, irrevocably mad. Who in their right mind calls a woman of my advanced age gorgeous? I was probably older than his own mother. I sat there, utterly frozen, unsure where to direct my gaze, my hands clutched awkwardly in my lap. Samantha, observing my sheer, unadulterated panic, was doubled over with laughter. She handed me a glass of rich red wine, clinking it gently against mine. "Elaine, darling," she said, her voice still laced with amusement, "are you having even a tiny bit of fun? Because if you are genuinely happy, even for a moment, then all of this delightful absurdity is entirely worth it. This life, Elaine, it's ours. It's meant to be lived, fully and unapologetically, for ourselves." In that moment, illuminated by the flashing strobe lights and Samantha's radiant conviction, I felt as if I were seeing the Samantha I had first befriended all those years ago. Wild, untamed, fiercely independent. The same indomitable woman who had once, with legendary aplomb, shoved her cheating fiancé, fully clothed, into a picturesque but decidedly murky lake, promptly broken off the engagement, and then proceeded to build a thriving business empire from scratch. A woman who had alchemized heartbreak into fortune. I took a long, slow sip of the wine. Then came the warmth, a surprising flush of exhilaration, of sheer, unadulterated freedom, spreading through my veins. I hadn't felt this alive, this gloriously, recklessly present, in decades. God, it felt good. I ended up staying at Samantha's place. It was initially intended as a temporary arrangement, a brief respite, but deep down, I already knew. I had taken that irrevocable first step out of my old life, and I had absolutely no intention of ever going back. The morning after our impromptu nightclub adventure, my head only slightly fuzzy, I called a lawyer Samantha recommended. The divorce papers were drafted, signed, and dispatched to Charles that very same day. He didn't respond. Not a single word, not a text, not a call. But I wasn't in any particular rush. I figured I'd allow him a few days to sit with the stark reality of it, to let the implications fully sink in. Instead, it was Ryan who called. This time, his tone was noticeably, almost unctuously, softer. "Mom, don't you think it's perhaps time to let all of this go? Don't you miss Liam terribly?" A cold, mirthless laugh escaped me. "Don't you recall, Ryan? You were the one who so gallantly informed me that once I walked out of that house, I shouldn't even bother contemplating a return." He attempted to coax and cajole me for a while longer, employing a wheedling tone that grated on my nerves. But when he finally realized I wasn't budging, his voice turned sharp once more, the familiar irritation seeping back in. "What's the deal with this divorce agreement, Mom? Why on earth should you get a substantial share of Dad's house and his savings? Are you planning to take our family's money and shack up with some other old guy?" I didn't even flinch. I remained perfectly calm. "Believe me, Ryan, I have been more than generous in this settlement. After 40 years of marriage, contributing in innumerable non-monetary ways, I could have legally pursued a claim for everything, but I didn't. I offered your father an opportunity to retain some semblance of dignity, to save face." Then I added, my voice deliberately cool and measured, or of course, I could just release that rather incriminating video of him and Vivian Harper to the public. Perhaps even send a copy to the university's ethics committee, and let them deal with the subsequent fallout. Let's see who ends up truly humiliated then, shall we? Ryan's tone snapped, his voice suddenly laced with a venomous fury that mirrored his father's. "You're nothing but a bitter, vindictive old woman. You'll never possess an ounce of the class or elegance that Vivian Harper naturally exudes. Go ahead, keep playing the martyr. When Dad finally marries her, you'll deeply regret ever walking out." I didn't bother replying. I simply ended the call, mid-rant. A few days later, Natalie called me, her voice hushed, conspiratorial. It was then that I finally understood the real reason behind Ryan's sudden, desperate attempts to lure me back. It turned out that Charles's meticulously ordered life had completely, catastrophically unraveled in my absence. I had catered to his every need for 4 decades, so thoroughly, so seamlessly, that he was apparently incapable of even pouring himself a glass of water without assistance. He still changed his clothes daily, a lifetime habit ingrained too deep to break, but now his soiled laundry piled up in the utility room, untouched, mounds of fabric slowly beginning to reek. With no one to prepare his carefully prescribed meals, he had resorted to ordering takeout from the greasy local diner. After each meal, the plastic containers and discarded cutlery simply sat on the mahogany dining table, accumulating the mess, growing by the day into a monument of his domestic incompetence. Initially, Ryan had instructed Natalie to help clean up after his father, to manage the household. But Ryan himself never lifted a finger at home, and Natalie, already stretched thin, juggling her own career, their child, and the entirety of their domestic responsibilities, simply couldn't manage Charles's rapidly expanding disaster zone on top of everything else. Eventually, Ryan, in desperation, hired a housekeeper through an agency to care for his father. But things, as they so often do in such situations, took an unexpected and rather sordid turn. The hired woman, somewhere in her late 40s, took one look at Charles, the distinguished professor, the man with a solid pension and presumably substantial savings, and evidently decided she wanted a more permanent and lucrative position. One day, Charles was invited to deliver a guest lecture out of town. Ryan stopped by the house to help him pack. He opened Charles's bedroom door and froze in sheer, unadulterated shock. The housekeeper was sprawled languidly across Charles's bed. At first, Ryan assumed she was merely being lazy, shirking her duties, and rushed over to yank off the covers. He was greeted with a full frontal, UN-blushing display. She wasn't wearing a single stitch of clothing. I burst out laughing when Natalie recounted this to me over the phone. I laughed so hard my stomach ached, tears streaming down my face. It sounded like a plot line from a preposterous, low-budget soap opera. Only now, thankfully, none of it had anything remotely to do with me. Ryan, predictably, had lost his mind. He called the agency immediately, his voice trembling with outrage, and fired the enterprising housekeeper on the spot. And once again, predictably, Ryan called me, practically begging me to come home, to restore order, to rescue them from the chaos. I simply thanked Natalie for her candidness, for sharing the unvarnished truth, and informed her that I would drop by to see Liam in a few days, but under no circumstances would I be stepping foot back into that house. Charles and Ryan had made their positions abundantly, painfully clear. In their eyes, I was never truly a wife, never authentically a mother. I was merely the most convenient, most reliable, and most importantly, entirely unpaid housekeeper they had ever had the good fortune to exploit. The next time I saw Charles Bennett was outside the austere edifice of the family courthouse. I wore simple blue jeans and a comfortable beige hoodie, my hair freshly dyed a rich, deep chestnut brown. It was a casual, unpretentious look, yet I felt more radiant, more authentically myself, than I had in years. Charles, in stark contrast, was dressed in his usual old-school, formal academic style, only this time his white shirt was noticeably wrinkled, the collar limp and slightly askew, the sleeves misaligned. He would never have dared to walk out the door in such a state of dishabille before. I didn't mock him, verbally or even with a glance. There was simply no point anymore. I just hoped the legal paperwork would be processed quickly. I had a yoga session scheduled with Samantha later that afternoon. When Charles caught sight of me, a flicker of genuine surprise, mingled with something else I couldn't quite decipher, crossed his face. "Elaine," he began, his voice tinged with an unfamiliar note. You've lost weight. What? Can't afford to eat properly now that you've left me?" I rolled my eyes, a gesture of pure, unadulterated boredom. "The weight loss, Charles, is attributable to a series of rather expensive thermage treatments. The apparent glow is simply the result of good tailoring and a significantly improved outlook on life. Neither, I assure you, has anything whatsoever to do with you. Men," I mused silently, "whether they're 16 or 60, never seem to run short on ego." What did catch me off guard, however, was that Charles didn't immediately lash out with his usual sarcastic vitriol. Instead, he looked at me with an expression of painfully forced, almost desperate tenderness. "Elaine," he said, his voice low and strained, Do we have to proceed with this? We've been married for 40 years. We're like a left and right hand? You know I'm not adept with words, but I've never done anything truly, deliberately wrong to you. Vivian and I, it was merely reminiscing about old times. That's all it ever was." I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze calm, clear, and unyielding. "Charles, it's patently obvious that you are not faring well. But the truth, unpalatable as it may be for you, is that I am." He looked as if he had more to say, his mouth opening and closing like a stranded fish. But just then, a voice, clear and melodic, called out, "Charles!" I turned. Vivian Harper had just stepped out of a sleek black cab, impeccably dressed in a sharply tailored suit, a vibrant silk scarf draped delicately around her neck. Despite her age, she carried herself with that same polished, unwavering poise, graceful, composed, and perfectly, flawlessly accessorized. She approached us with a soft, almost beatific smile, as if this awkward, emotionally charged scene, unfolding on the courthouse steps, was the most natural, everyday occurrence in the world. Charles looked instantly flustered, rushing to explain, his words tumbling out in a nervous torrent. Vivian merely came to offer her support. She was terribly worried when she heard about the divorce proceedings. You know, Elaine, I've always regarded her as a sister." I laughed under my breath, a dry, humorless sound. "That certainly sounds familiar, Charles. 38 long years ago, you uttered those exact same words. Are you hesitating to sign the papers now? Or are you perhaps hoping to resurrect that tired old, duplicitous game again? Wife safely ensconced at home, mistress conveniently available on the side?" Vivian had always been Charles's close college friend. They had perpetually maintained a carefully calibrated ambiguity in their interactions, always insisting on its utter innocence. I, of course, was already pregnant with Ryan back then. For the sake of the unborn baby, and to secure Charles's precarious path through his final year of tuition, I had reluctantly, painfully, forced myself into that marriage, and in doing so, had insisted he sever all ties with her. I still vividly remembered him yelling at me, his face contorted with fury. "You're just a pathologically jealous woman, Elaine. Vivian and I are simply friends, nothing more." From that moment onward, he had carried that perceived injustice, that bitterness, like a festering grudge. Vivian was his symbol of lost youth, his unattainable idealized fantasy. And I was the permanent blemish on his otherwise pristine life, the one he couldn't wash off, never elegant enough, never sufficiently refined, just a persistent, unwelcome stain he was forced to live with. Vivian now stood directly before me, her tone impeccably calm, her posture perfectly serenely measured. "Elaine," she began, her voice dripping with feigned sincerity, "if my presence has inadvertently caused any rift between you and Charles, I am truly, deeply sorry. But please, you must believe me, I never, ever intended to interfere in your marriage. I just couldn't quite let go of those cherished, youthful memories." She tilted her head slightly towards Charles, their eyes meeting in a tender, lingering, and utterly nauseating gaze. I could practically hear her internal monologue. Poor, dear Charles, trapped in such a loveless, stifling marriage all these tedious years. Charles, of course, wouldn't dare exhibit an ounce of genuine remorse or vulnerability in front of her. And just as I expected, one gentle, understanding glance from Vivian. "Vivian, darling, don't waste your precious breath on her. She wouldn't possibly understand the profound intellectual bond we share. She never did. If a divorce is what she truly desires, then I shall be the bigger person and magnanimously let her go." Charles and Vivian, cooing and preening at each other right there in front of me, was enough to make anyone gag. But the real, unadulterated comedy, the truly priceless moment, arrived the instant Vivian laid her perfectly manicured hands on the divorce agreement. Her serene, composed expression shattered in an instant, replaced by a look of sheer, incandescent fury. "What is this?" she practically shrieked, her voice several octaves higher than her usual modulated tones. "Why on earth should she receive such a substantial portion of your estate? This is completely, utterly unfair, Charles." I smiled, a slow, deliberate stretching of my lips. "What I choose to take from this marriage, Vivian, is absolutely none of your concern. Or do those incredibly cherished, sacrosanct memories between you two only manage to survive and flourish if supported by a very healthy, very substantial bank balance?" That clearly hit a nerve. Vivian's face stiffened, her carefully applied makeup unable to conceal the sudden flush that spread across her cheeks. "No, Charles, darling, please don't misunderstand me. I'm simply worried that she's taking advantage of your good nature. You've always been far too kind, too trusting. I just don't want her walking away with everything you've worked so tirelessly for all these years." Charles nodded gently, his voice now dripping with a false, saccharine warmth. "I know you've never cared about material possessions, Vivian. We built everything from nothing, together, you and I, in spirit. You're simply not the type to be materialistic." I was utterly exhausted by their pathetic, transparent little play. "Charles," I stated, my voice flat and devoid of emotion, "either you sign this agreement today, right now, or I will personally walk that rather revealing video recording straight into your university department office. Let's just see how the esteemed faculty, not to mention the Board of Governors, reacts to their distinguished Professor Bennett unceremoniously pushing his wife of 40 years out the door specifically so he can rekindle." I paused, then glanced pointedly at Vivian, letting my words hang in the air for a moment before adding, slowly and deliberately, "Scratch that. Not a new flame, is it? More like an old, flickering one. Just a ghost from 30-odd years ago, pathetically crawling back for a second belated chance." Vivian opened her mouth to snap back, a retort no doubt forming on her lips, but then she visibly caught herself, desperately clinging to her cultivated image of poise and elegance. Her face flushed a deep, unbecoming crimson, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might crack under the pressure. The only thing I was truly, genuinely grateful for in this entire debacle of a marriage was how intimately, how thoroughly I knew Charles's manifold weaknesses. For a man like him, a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in his professional standing, losing face at the institution to which he had devoted his entire adult life was a fate far worse than death itself. So, yes, I walked out of that courthouse later that day with my official divorce certificate clutched in one hand, and a legally binding agreement securing a very solid share of his accumulated assets in the other. As we signed the final documents, Charles was still pathetically attempting to impress Vivian. "Don't you worry your pretty little head, sweetheart," he'd said, puffing up his chest in a ludicrous display of bravado. "I can still write scholarly papers, still lead groundbreaking research initiatives. Money, after all, comes and goes, but my dear Vivian, I am the true asset here." They walked out of the courthouse shoulder to shoulder, looking insufferably smug and self-satisfied. Vivian even had the audacity to glance back at me with a smug, pitying little smile. "You'll regret this, you know," she said, her voice laced with condescension. "You've just lost a truly extraordinary man." I smiled right back at her, a genuine, almost joyful smile this time, and replied coolly, "He's 60 years old, Vivian. If he can still by any stretch of the imagination be called a man, it's probably thanks to a hefty dose of prescription medication. But hey, if you're genuinely happy to take the leftovers I've tossed out, then please, by all means, be my guest." They were too stunned to speak, just stood there, mouths agape, utterly speechless. Life after the divorce turned out to be even lighter, more joyful, more liberating than I had ever dared to imagine. Samantha, bless her fiercely loyal heart, flat out refused to let me move out of her apartment. She clung to me every day like a gleeful, mischievous partner in crime, plotting new adventures, new ways to embrace our newfound freedom. I still woke up early each morning, a habit ingrained over decades, but no longer to the dreary tasks of cooking Charles's bland breakfast or meticulously ironing his endless supply of shirts. Now, I started my mornings with a tall glass of cool water and half an hour of invigorating yoga, often practiced in the warm sunlight streaming onto Samantha's balcony. I watered the burgeoning collection of plants we'd acquired, brewed fragrant herbal tea, and then curled up in a comfortable rocking chair on that same balcony with a good book, peacefully waiting for Samantha to awaken so we could amble down to the little diner on the corner for a leisurely breakfast. We even started seriously discussing the possibility of adopting a dog, and perhaps a cat as well, just the two of us, contentedly building our own unique version of a free-spirited, gloriously independent senior commune. Suddenly, my days were filled with things to genuinely look forward to, with laughter, with lightness, with possibility. Charles's days, on the other hand, steadily, irrevocably, descended into a state of escalating chaos. He and Vivian, I learned, through the grapevine, primarily a surprisingly candid Natalie, had quietly registered their marriage. Ryan, of course, was reportedly thrilled. He had privately confided in Natalie, with a chilling pragmatism. Sure, Mom took nearly half of Dad's assets in the divorce, but she's too old now to have any more kids. So when she eventually dies, it'll all come back to me anyway. Besides, he'd apparently added, Dad marrying Vivian is actually a good thing for me. She's childless, after all. Who knows, maybe she'll even help me out financially down the line. I mean, she's effectively living off my... When Natalie relayed this delightful tidbit of filial devotion to me, I simply advised her to be cautious, to diligently protect their own finances. Vivian, from what I had observed, certainly didn't strike me as someone who had married for love. Her entire demeanor, her every calculated gesture, screamed of a relentless pursuit of status and money. Only Charles, in his self-deluding vanity, and Ryan, in his greedy naivety, could still cling to some sappy, romanticized fantasy of an unforgettable, eternally enduring first love after 40 long years. As time went on, Charles's new life with Vivian transformed into a farcical comedy show that Samantha and I often giggled over during our leisurely afternoon tea sessions. Their first significant domestic dispute, Natalie reported, erupted over Charles's unfortunate habit of urinating while standing up and consequently splashing the toilet seat. Vivian was apparently furious, demanding that he either sit down from now on or, at the very least, significantly improve his aim. Charles, predictably, had exploded. I am a man. Sitting down to pee makes me no different from a woman. Vivian, however, was not to be deterred. She had snapped right back, her voice sharp and dismissive. Then perhaps you should consider taking something for your obviously enlarged prostate, so you stop dribbling all over the bathroom like a broken, incontinent faucet. And to add insult to injury, she hadn't delivered this scathing critique in private. Oh no. She had announced it during a tense family dinner, right in front of Ryan and Natalie. Whatever shred of paternal authority Charles might have imagined he still possessed was utterly, irrevocably crushed in that moment. Vivian, it turned out, did absolutely no housework whatsoever. She dispatched her expensive clothes to the dry cleaner, demanded restaurant-quality meals delivered every night, and hired professional cleaning services to visit every couple of days. Charles's once substantial, nearly $20,000 monthly salary began to vanish like water down a drain. I sometimes found myself wondering, with a detached amusement, if Charles, after enduring all the petty arguments, the mounting bills, and the increasingly chaotic household mess, still perceived his perfect lover, his idealized Vivian, in quite the same rosy, romantic light. Quite the same rosy, romantic light. The first time Ryan reached out to me after the divorce decree was finalized, it was 2 days into a spontaneous road trip I'd embarked upon with Samantha. His voice, when he finally got through, was frantic, bordering on hysterical. Mom, Dad's in the hospital. He was attacked. It's serious, Mom. Can you please come and see him? Just for old time's sake? I raised an eyebrow, though he couldn't see it. Isn't that Vivian's responsibility now, Ryan? She is, after all, legally his wife. There was a strained pause on the line. Then I heard Natalie shout something agitatedly in the background. It was Vivian's ex-husband. And her son. They were the ones who attacked him. I froze, the phone almost slipping from my grasp. Wait, what? The same Vivian, who had tearfully claimed to have loved only Charles, pining for him her entire adult life, actually had a previous husband? And a son? So much for that undying, lifelong, exclusive love she'd so dramatically professed. Fine, I said, a strange mixture of shock and grim satisfaction settling within me. Send me the hospital address. I'll go. Then I hung up. The second I put down the phone, I turned to Samantha, who was driving, and spilled the entire sordid story. She laughed so hard, she was practically wiping tears away, yet still managed to say with dead seriousness, "Girl, you absolutely have to go and witness this spectacle. You simply cannot miss this golden, once-in-a-lifetime, fallen-from-grace moment." I laughed too, a genuine, unrestrained sound. Then, without another word, I turned the car around, and we ended our much-anticipated road trip prematurely. Because yes, some train wrecks are just too deliciously, satisfyingly catastrophic to watch from a distance. Before heading directly to the hospital, I called Natalie again, ostensibly to confirm the room number, but primarily to ascertain what the hell had actually transpired. What she told me was beyond anything I could have possibly imagined. It turned out that Vivian hadn't just been married before. She'd apparently been married multiple times, and each successive relationship had been more chaotic and dysfunctional than the last. Her most recent ex-husband, the father of her son, was reportedly a walking disaster area. Drinking, gambling, brawling, the full trifecta of undesirable traits. Tired of that particular brand of mess, Vivian had evidently set her sights on Charles, the distinguished university professor, a man of status, with considerable savings, and steady, reliable pension. In her calculating eyes, he was, quite simply, a walking, talking retirement fund. She had apparently sweet-talked her then-husband into a quick divorce, promising him that once she had successfully secured Charles's assets, they would get back together, richer and more comfortable than before. And for a while, her audacious plan had worked. She had moved in with Charles, played the role of the perfect, adoring companion, and conveniently cut all contact with her ex. But of course, people like her ex-husband rarely just disappear quietly into the night. He hadn't taken the betrayal, or the interruption to his anticipated financial windfall, lightly. He had shown up at Charles's college, with their strapping biological son in tow, and proceeded to go on a full-blown public rampage right in front of the main lecture hall. He had pointed an accusatory finger directly in Charles's face and yelled, "For all the students and faculty to hear, you think you're some noble, esteemed professor, huh? You're nothing but a common homewrecker, a pathetic old fool." Then he had thrown a punch. And another. They had beaten Charles so badly that he ended up bruised, bleeding, and utterly, profoundly humiliated, in front of his students no less. For a man like Charles, who had meticulously built his entire identity around notions of respectability, reputation, and intellectual superiority, it was a fatal, irrecoverable blow. He had apparently collapsed on the spot. By the time I arrived at the hospital, Charles had just regained consciousness. He lay in the sterile white bed, looking small, frail, and utterly broken. He lifted a trembling hand weakly and murmured, his voice raspy, "Vivian, can you get me a glass of water, please?" I sighed, a sound of pure, weary resignation, then poured him the water anyway from the plastic pitcher on the bedside table. He took a tentative sip, blinking slowly, his eyes struggling to focus, clearly confused. It took a few long seconds before his gaze finally landed on me, and then, just like that, his face shifted, a rapid kaleidoscope of emotions flashing across his bruised features. Shame, awkwardness, profound regret, and finally, a desperate, pleading hope, before settling into a dull, lifeless gray. "Elaine," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. I made a mistake, Elaine. A terrible, terrible mistake. I really, truly did. Can we possibly go back to how things used to be?" I smiled faintly, a slight, almost imperceptible curve of my lips. If you had asked me that question a little earlier, Charles, his eyes lit up, a pathetic flicker of hope igniting within them, clinging to my every word. I probably would have slapped you hard across the face, just to try and wake you up to reality, I finished. My voice still soft, almost sweet. But now, looking at you, I'm genuinely afraid one slap might actually kill you. And frankly, Charles, I'm simply not in the mood to be charged with murder today. He was stunned into silence, his eyes dropping to the patterned linoleum floor, his lower lip trembling. You weren't like this before, he finally muttered, his voice choked with a mixture of disbelief and self-pity. You never yelled at me. You used to do everything I said. Was I really not like this before? A wave of memory, sharp and clear, washed over me. I used to be sharp-tongued, bold, fiercely articulate about what I loved and what I vehemently hated. That was the woman who had first forged a friendship with Samantha, two independent, fiery souls drawn to each other, precisely because neither of us had any patience for playing small, for diminishing ourselves. I used to love fiercely, to give everything of myself, without reservation, to the one I chose. But I had chosen wrong. Decades of silent, stoic endurance, of swallowing my words and my pride, had gradually, insidiously, dulled me down. Even my sharpest edges had been worn smooth by the constant friction of his indifference, his contempt. I had become timid, hesitant, constantly rehearsing every sentence in my head before daring to speak, all to avoid triggering his displeasure, his cold disdain. But that passive, fearful creature wasn't the real me. That was the suffocating role women of my generation were so often taught to play. Be soft, be quiet, be endlessly, uncomplainingly agreeable. Charles kept rambling, his words devolving into incoherent sobs, unraveling completely like a man unhinged by the collapse of his carefully constructed world. I calmly pressed the call button for the nurse and then, without a single backward glance, I walked away. Later, Ryan called me, repeatedly, all for the same predictable reason, begging for my help, for my intervention. Vivian, it turned out, was doing absolutely nothing to care for the broken man in the hospital bed, yet was still managing to spend his rapidly dwindling money with the efficiency of a full-time professional. The worst part, Ryan relayed in a voice tight with frustration, was that Vivian's ex-husband and her son had now, apparently, moved into Charles's house. If it weren't for the bruises Vivian occasionally, ineptly, tried to cover with heavy makeup, they almost looked, Ryan said with bitter sarcasm, like one big twisted, dysfunctional, but strangely happy family unit. Ryan had attempted to kick them out, of course, but Vivian's ex-husband was no timid pushover. Ryan, for all his bluster, was no physical match for the man. The ex had even made a bold, outrageous offer. You want Vivian to divorce your old man? Fine. Have Charles sign over everything he owns and walk out of here penniless. Then, maybe. And Charles? His prestigious university job was long gone, a casualty of the public scandal. What little savings he had managed to retain after our divorce were draining away at an alarming rate. He couldn't even afford a private nurse anymore. Of course, Ryan wouldn't agree to any of that. Now, he was the one drowning in the messy, chaotic consequences, taking out his mounting frustration on everyone around him, particularly Natalie. She started visiting me more frequently with Liam, and I could sense something subtly shifting within her, a quiet heaviness in her demeanor, a profound weariness in her voice. I knew what she was thinking, what she was contemplating. Divorce. And maybe, I thought with a pang of sadness for her, but also a flicker of hope, maybe that was for the best. At least she still had time. She was young. She had a chance to extricate herself before she became irrevocably trapped in a marriage that would inevitably drain her spirit, her life, away. And I certainly didn't want my grandson, Liam, growing up learning how to treat women from a deeply flawed model like Ryan. I wasted 40 years of my life on a man who never deserved a single moment of my devotion. Time, unfortunately, doesn't rewind. What's lost, what's squandered, can never truly be reclaimed. But still, I hold on to a fervent hope that every woman in this world finds the courage to love fiercely, and to be loved in return deeply and wholly. And when that love is gone, or revealed to have been an illusion, that she possesses the clarity and strength to know when to walk away, to never ever chain herself to someone's indifference, to someone's contempt. Let my life, my mistakes, be a mirror, a cautionary tale. And may yours, dear reader, never, ever have to reflect mine.